Sup you beautiful people, hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku Had the Powers of inFAMOUS. All he ever wanted was to be a hero. All he ever wanted was to save people. Well, be careful what you wish for Izuku Midoriya, because the universe just might grant it, in the worst possible way. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Immediately the trio bolted, quickly hiding behind the stone wall that separated the beach from the street beyond. Izuku looked to Mineta and then to Tsu, the first of which was shivering in his shoes, his eyes frantic whilst Tsu had reverted back to her emotionless expression, her euphoria forgotten, but even then he could see the fear growing the corner of her eyes as small erratic bursts of gunfire and frightened screams fill the air. "What's going on? Why are villains here?" Mineta silently screamed as each tried to pinpoint where exactly the noise was coming from. "We have to see what's going on," Izuku whispered as he slowly peeked his head above the wall only to be pulled back down by Mineta. "Are you crazy? Whoever it is, they have guns. Let's just leave it to the pros," he said in a strained squeak. "The heroes aren't coming," Tsu said with a look of certainty as the two wheeled around to face her. "And how would you know?" Mineta accused. "That was impossible. It was their jobs to come and stop the villains." "Why would they not come? I've been hearing gunfire in the distance off and on again for the last few days from my home. And very little police sirens coming from the same direction," she informed, keeping her eyes trained on where the noise was coming from. "That doesn't explain why they wouldn't come," Izuku said, wondering where she was going with this. "It was on the news. An entire hero agency and a few solo heroes got wiped out in the blast. So I think all those dead heroes mixed with how many civilians died is making the rest lose their nerve," she coldly explained while Izuku was feeling a storm of guilt and anger. An entire agency gone in the blink of an eye, all because of him. If not for the anger, he was almost certain he would have frozen, his mind entering a tailspin of self-hatred. But that anger was there, and it was burning his insides like a fire. How could they claim to be heroes yet when the going gets tough they ran away? "I'm going to stop them," he said as he tried to vault over only to again be pulled down. "You're going to get yourself killed," Mineta screamed. "I am not going to look your mother in the eye and tell her you died trying to be a hero, but we want to be heroes, don't we?" he argued. If he didn't do something now to help, then he didn't deserve to ever be called a hero. "If you go, you won't be a hero, you'll be just as bad as the villains. You'd be a villain using your powers unlawfully," she countered, to which Izuku could only look at her in shock. "No offense, Tsu, but that's stupid. We've been unlawfully using our powers all day, and before there were heroes, there were vigilantes before the government made them official. If simply using your powers to help makes you a villain, then every good Samaritan should be behind bars," he railed as Tsuyu looked away. "Look, I know you're scared, I am too. But we have to do something," he said, restraining from yelling. In truth, he needed to do this. He needed to start paying them back, and if he died in the attempt, then at least he tried. "If you want to stay here, fine, but don't try and stop me," he finished as he hopped the wall and ran off towards the gunfire, not letting Mineta have the chance to pull him back for a third time as he heard him scream his name. He didn't need to run far as the gunfire became louder and louder, battling with drumming of his heart in his eardrums in a contest to see which could deafen him first. His heart was hammering in his chest, and his palms were sweaty as he stopped at the corner of a small intersection and peeked around to see them. There were 5 of them, and each one was wearing a dark red hoodie that obscured their faces. And all of them were armed with Russian rifles he'd seen in old war movies as they fired into the air and buildings that lined the street. It seemed the street they were on was acting as an open market before they showed up as overturned carts and produce littered the street. Turning back around, he looked at his hands, flickers of energy dancing along them as he prepared for the fight of his life. But how was he going to do this? They outnumbered him 5-1, and who knows how many more might be lurking around. They were armed with guns and who knows what quirks as well. But that was when remembered the most important rule in combat. Always fight from the high ground. It wasn't a lot, but at least it gave him something to start with. Looking up, he decided to test his newfound strength as he jumped up to a ledge and began scaling the building, untrained fingers only taking a few moments to understand as he climbed. In a matter of seconds, he had scaled a 3-story building, and in any other scenario, he would be absolutely astonished with that feat. But he had job to do as he silently crept across the roof of the building. Slowly, building by building, he got closer, being able to now hear them talking. And strangely, it almost sounded like they were underwater, as one coughed up a stream of black fluid. Breathing in one last deep breath, he shot up from his hiding spot, his right arm crackling with energy as he aimed it at the first villain. With a loud zap, he released a bolt of lightning straight into the chest of the first villain, knocking him clean off his feet, though he did not have time to see if he was down for the count as he was forced back behind cover as his position became riddled with bullets as the rest opened fired. Covering his head as pieces of concrete and fell all around, he looked around for another place to move. If he got pinned down, he was as good as dead. For a moment, the gunfire stopped, allowing him to look to his right and see another building across a small alley, and as he was about to make a break for it, he heard a strange metal clink as something dropped next to him. He turned his head to see the familiar pineapple shape of grenade as his eyes bulged in his sockets as he leaped away, the heat and shockwave rocking the building and hurtling him to the other side. Izuku nearly bit the tip off his tongue as pain rippled through body as he rolled to a stop, but to his surprise, when he looked at his body, he didn't see any blood or obvious signs of injury. But he wasn't given the time for a proper examination as his new cover was once again assailed with gunfire. This was getting him nowhere. He needed a way to take them all out in one go, otherwise he was done for. That was when he had an idea. Just before they threw the grenade, the shooting stopped, probably allowing the others time to reload while he lobbed it. So all he had to do was wait for that moment. But how was he going to take them all out? He couldn't do this more than once or else they would see the pattern, and he had only so much roof to work with. He racked his brain, biting his lip so hard it bled as tried to figure out what to do. That when he remembered what Sue had done as the memory of her jumping out of the water and slamming into the sand. If he could somehow wreath himself in his electricity, he could create a shockwave that could hit them all at once. Just as that thought had finished, did the sound of gunfire stop and forced Izuku's hand. He didn't know if this idea would work, but it was now or never, and with one last breath he jumped off the balcony, into the street, and straight into the villains. In that moment he could see them, hurriedly swapping out magazines while one threw the grenade, the explosive projectile sailing right by him as arcs of electricity wrapped around him as he descended like a crackling blue comet. The villains barely had time to process what was happening as Izuku's feet hit the ground, and the earth erupted with the force of an artillery shell as he sent a massive shockwave throwing trash, carts and goons all across the street. Izuku did not give them the time to recover, and as the second grenade exploded on the roof above him, raining pieces of concrete across the street, he lifted a hand and blasted 3 of the 4 goons with electricity. The 4th one, however, he was not fast enough to shoot as the villain again gurgled, coughed up a black fluid that didn't look like blood, and lifted its weapon. Izuku on instinct rushed the villain and grabbed his gun, attempting to wrestle control away from the villain as the electricity in his hand surged through the rifle and cooked off the gunpowder, causing the gun itself to explode and knocking both of them back. With numb, blackened hands he looked up to see the last villain, and his own eyes went wide. The villain's hands had been completely mangled, one hand missing most of its fingers. But with such a terrible injury, the villain stood stone still, watching Izuku from behind their darkened hoodie. What is this guy made out of? Izuku thought to himself, astonished by the enemy's insane pain tolerance. But almost as a response to the question, the villain's arms began to be covered in thick, black ooze until they turned into vicious whips. Now it was Izuku's turn to be surprised as the whips lashed out, giving him barely enough time to protect his body as they slammed into him with the force of a truck, sending him flying straight into a wall, cracking it. Izuku sputtered for air as he landed in the ground, barely able to keep himself from falling on his face as he struggled to bring air back into his lungs. Through blurry eyes he could see the villain, his whip-like arms swaying from side to side like a venomous snake. Each step taken sounding like a foreboding bell. On shaky legs, he stood back up as he prepared to fight him before he heard a loud wet smack that almost reminded of a bursting water balloon. The sound was immediately followed up by the sight of the villain hurtling through the air and landing on the hood of a car. Then he began to hear a new sound, the sound of fast approaching footsteps and a familiar voice. "Oh my God. Izuku, are you all right?" he heard Mineta say as the diminutive boy looked around at all the destruction. Izuku meanwhile felt a wave of relief and weariness wash over him as he looked for a place to sit down and settled for an overturned cart, his head feeling as though it had been put in a vice. Yeah, never better, he eventually groaned, looking up to both Mineta and his rescuer, who even now had drops of water dripping from her hand. Thanks for the save, he said to Tsu, who periodically switched from looking at the downed villain to him. She nodded in acknowledgement. You're welcome, just glad you're okay. Hey man, I'm sorry, he heard Mineta say. I shouldn't have let you go off on your own, I should have helped, he said, a look of shame etched on his face. Izuku could only put an arm on his friend's shoulder, too tired and too happy to still be alive to be angry. It's okay, Mineta, it was my choice to make, he said, giving him a smile. Besides, if you want to help, you can. He trailed off as he saw another member of the red-coated villains rush out of an alley and leveling a shotgun at Tsu's back. Instantly he moved, faster than he knew he could, and dashed from his sitting position, pushing Tsu out of the way as the villain fired, the metal balls sailing through the air and straight into his chest, knocking him end over end and onto his back. Izuku, Mineta screamed as Tsu launched a bolt of water straight at the villain's head, slamming into him and bouncing him off the wall of the alley he had come from. Izuku, for his part, was in immense pain. His chest felt like it was being stung by thousands of hornets, forcing him to take short, gasping breaths as Mineta rushed to his side, tearing streaming from his eyes. Izuku, stay with me, he yelled as he ran to him. Clenching his jaw so hard, he feared he would shatter his teeth, he hoisted himself up and looked at his chest in confusion. Where he expected to see a bloodied mess of bone shards, he saw nothing except holes in his shirt. Grabbing at the collar of his shirt, he tore it in half to reveal a chest completely blackened by bruises. Tenderly touching his body, he scanned it for the damage his mind told should be there, but there was nothing, no holes, blood, or fragments of bone. We need to get you to a hospital, Tsuyu said, stress in her voice as for second time today he saw emotion on her face, genuine worry. No hospital, he said as tried to pull himself up to his feet. If he got sent to the hospital, they would no doubt start asking questions whose answers he knew would get him in deep trouble. As he got to his hand and knees, he was stopped by Tsu as she put her hand on his shoulder. It was then he released an involuntary radar pulse and saw the nervous systems of his friends, the bioelectricity coursing through them, evoking a terrible, monstrous idea. Feed with a groan, he shook his head hard, dispersing the alien thought as he looked to see a lamp post. Pulling himself from Tsu's grip, the pair watched as he crawled his way to the electrical source like a man dying of thirst. What are you doing? We need to get you help, Tsu pressed, but Midoriya ignored her, focusing on the river of electrical life, stretching out a hand and feeling the lines of energy being drawn to him as arcs of electricity erupted from the post and into his body. It lasted only a few seconds before he completely drained it. With a relieved sigh, he felt the pain dissipate like smoke in the wind and got back up and turned towards them. He looked completely fine, the bruises were gone, and without so much as a scratch to show his encounter with a 12 gauge. Holy shit, Mineta gasped as the trio began to hear movement all around them, Izuku readying himself for another fight when he saw the scared and amazed looks of the civilians. Did you see what those kids did? One of them said as upwards of a dozen people began filtering out of the surrounding buildings, forming a crowd around them. That was really brave, what you did, kid, an older man said, clapping a hand to Izuku's shoulder. Brave? This poor young man just got shot, an old woman said, her brow wrinkling as she glared at the man. Yeah, but look at him, not even a scratch, the man countered, giving the young Midoriya a reassuring smile. Yeah, you saw him, he came in like POW, and zap, and then he slammed into the ground and blew them all away, a young boy said, looking at Midoriya with stars in his eyes. In that moment, as he looked at the child, he couldn't help but be reminded of his younger self as he would watch videos of All Might stopping villains, pretending to be him as he ran around in his All Might costume. But his internal remembrance was short-lived, as several other conversations began happening all at once, which began to overwhelm the green-haired boy. All right, that's enough. He heard a voice ring out that silenced the crowd as everyone turned around to see a tall, overweight man whose gut hung over his belt buckle and who had large protruding lips. He saved your lives and your stuff. The least you can do is give him some space, he barked. The older members of the crowd huffed but listened as the crowd began to disperse, some trying to salvage any of their wares that hadn't been destroyed in the fight. Now then, my name's Haruki, and not to be rude, but it looks like you could use some new clothes, the large man said, pointing to his now tattered rags. Izuku looked down at himself and the hell that would come if his mother saw him come home looking like this. Why don't you come inside my shop, and I'll see if there's anything in your size, he chuckled, pointing the store a little further down the road. I'd like to, but I don't have any money, he said, not really knowing how to act in this situation. The large man just gave him a look, as if he had just said the dumbest thing in the world. Kid, after what you pulled, do you really think I'm going to make you pay? He asked incredulously. It's on the house. Rubbing the back of his head, he thought over the man's proposal. He didn't want to appear rude, and he did need some clothes. Turning around for a second opinion, he saw an expectant look on both of their faces as well, wondering what he would choose, and with that he did. I'm going to go get some new clothes, he decided. While I'm doing that, maybe Mineta could use his quirk to restrain the bad guys, and Tsuyu could call the police, he advised as the two looked to each other. That's a good idea, Tsuyu said as she pulled Mineta along, and Izuku followed the man further down the road. They didn't have to walk far as the pair came to a rather dingy pawn shop with metal bars covering the window and door. Now then, allow me to show you my wares, he announced with a smile as he unlocked the door. I'm gonna go look in the back, so while I'm there take a look around, I'm sure there's something you would like, he said as he unlocked the door to the back and left Izuku all alone. In that moment, in that silence, did everything that had happened in the last few minutes come into perspective. He had fought villains, real villains, with guns, and he had gotten shot. Holy shit, he whispered to himself as he took in deep, panicked breaths. He did it, and he nearly died, the mix of emotions smashing together in his mind as he ran his fingers through his hair. That was nothing like the videos, he thought to himself, nervously laughing as the reality of hero work clashed with his childish fantasies. He had seen so many times heroes fighting villains. Sure, they sometimes got hurt, but they would always win. But what had just done was real combat, and with that came a burning realization. All Might had been right, the idea searing at his ego like a brand, but he could no longer look away from the truth. Without his quirk, he would have died, and all his hopes and dreams would have counted for nothing against a shotgun, let alone an actual quirk. All Might was just trying to protect him, and he had been too proud to accept it. Taking in one last breath, he steadied himself, letting his emotions not get the better of him as he focused on the store he was in. And just from an initial view, it truly looked like he had everything from jewelry, tools, clothes, and even car parts. But as he walked, he noticed an odd squishing sound, and as he looked down, he groaned in frustration as once again, the bottom of his shoes had melted. Not wanting to mess up Haruki's store, he pulled them off, carrying them with him as he looked around. Honestly, he didn't really know what exactly to look for. He doubted a pawn shop would be selling something that can stop bullets. And as he saw Haruki come out of the back carrying a handful of clothes as he plopped them down on the cashier table. A light, I found this, he said, lifting up a yellow and black jacket. Got these off an electrician a few weeks back, so I figured it'd be good for someone with a quirk like yours. Izuku held the new clothes, thinking that was a good idea. It looked to be about his size, and it did look nice. Do you have any shoes that won't melt, he asked, shamefully showing the melted pair in his hands. The man brought a hand to his chin, rubbing it intently as he snapped his fingers as he went around the counter and into one of the aisles, and returned with a pair of white and black sneakers. These should do the trick, he said with a proud smile as Izuku looked them over. They ain't exactly hero grade, but they are Detnerat quality, so they should be enough, promised. Izuku's eyes flashed when he heard the name. They were one of the most popular civilian-grade support item companies in Japan. Thank you so much for all of this. I promise I'll pay you back when I get the money, he said, though the man simply waved his hand. Like I said, you stopped those guys, and I wouldn't feel right if I made you pay, he repeated. But who were they, he asked, hoping that this was just a small-time group. Haruki took a long look out into the street before answering, a foreboding look in her eyes before he leaned in. Before the blast, they weren't that much of an issue. Just a bunch of junkies dealing drugs, but now, he said, trailing off and shaking his head. But now they call themselves the Reapers and they've gotten way more violent, he said, and Izuku felt a chill run up his spine. No one knows how many there are, but they take what they want, when they want, and until now no one had tried to stop them. It's a sad state of affairs when it's the adults that have to rely on kids for protection, he confessed, a look of sadness in his eyes. What had he gotten himself into, his inner voice said. Hey kid, Haruki said, snapping his fingers and bringing Izuku back to reality. There's a changing room over there, and if you or your friends ever need anything else, come on by, I'll give them a discount, he said as Izuku picked up the pile of clothes and walked off to change. A few minutes later, he re-emerged and looked himself in the viewing mirror. The clothes fit surprisingly well as he gave a few test stretches. Kid, Haruki said as he was about to leave, making the young man look back to him. You planning on being a hero, he asked, to which Midoriya nodded. Then there's one more thing I'd like to give you, he whispered, as his eyes turned red and puffy. Bending down behind the counter, Izuku heard as the man rustled around before pulling out a silver briefcase. Fascinated by what he was offering, he came to the table and watched as he opened the briefcase and turned it to show a long silver cord of wire with a black handle on one end. "I got this off of a pro hero who liked gambling a bit too much. She called it her lightning whip," he explained, shocking the young boy. It was illegal for heroes to sell their equipment to normal people, the power they held being seen as too big of a risk. "Pick it up and pump some lightning into it," he said as Izuku hesitantly picked up the handle. It was light in his hand, and as he allowed the power of his quirk to flow into it. Immediately the cord sprung to life, arcs of electricity sparking across its entire length. This is too much, I can't take this," he stammered. It didn't feel right to take so much from the man, but when he looked back he could see the tears were flowing now. "My son wanted to be a hero too, wanted to go to UA even," he said in a shaky breath. "But now he can't," he said, breathing through his teeth as he forced the words out. "So please take it and do some good with it. The world's getting crazier, and it's gonna need people like you to set it right," he confessed with a mournful smile. Izuku stood there, watching this man confess to him over the loss of his son, and could only think of one thing to say. "What was his name?" he asked as Haruki slowly pulled out his wallet and revealed a small picture of a tall, muscular boy about his age with lips just like his father. Rikido Sato, Mineta, and Tsuyu had done what Midoriya had suggested, using his quirk to stick the villains to the concrete. It had not been as easy as they would have liked, as the villains thrashed against their sticky restraints, spitting out globs of black fluid as they yelled. After they made sure that they wouldn't get out, Tsuyu had called the police. That had been a few minutes ago, and a tense malaise had settled over them both. They had allowed their friend to go off and face a bunch of villains alone, and that fact was hitting Mineta particularly hard. "Damn it," Mineta whispered to himself, shame filling him as he covered half his face with his hand. He had known Izuku for years, called him his brother, but when shit hit the fan he hid like a coward and let him fight those villains by himself. Shame could not even begin to describe the anger he felt with himself. But as he looked over to Tsuyu, who like always was unreadable, and it was beginning to piss him off. Here he was, his cowardice eating himself alive, and she didn't seem the least bit affected. "He saved your life," Mineta chirped, hoping to bring a hint of emotion out of her. "I know," she said, her voice only slightly wavering. "We should have gone with him," he vented, turning to face her fully. This time she said nothing, her eyes staring off as she looked at something only she could see. Before Mineta could get any further, they both saw Izuku walking down the road, wearing new clothes and carrying a silver briefcase. "You two ready to go?" he asked as the two both silently nodded, the argument stopping before I could begin. It was evening now, the sun beginning to set and bathing the sky in orange light. And as Mineta called his uncle telling him they were done early, the old woman from before came up to them holding a bag. "Hold on a moment," the old lady said as she shuffled to the trio. "Here you go, child, was trying to sell it before it went bad, but I think you should have it," she said, handing the bag to Izuku, who opened it to reveal several ears of corn and potatoes. Izuku tried to not accept the gift, but the woman shook and insisted, and not giving him the chance to argue as she walked away, leaving him with the food. Sighing and shaking his head with a forced smile, he turned towards Mineta and Tsu as they all walked home. The walk back was silent, none of them really wanting to speak about what had happened, until they had reached Tsuyu's apartment building. The frog girl turning around and nearly shocking both boys as they saw her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Ribbit," she croaked, the emotions making her nervous tick reemerge as she struggled to keep her breathing even. "You're my friend, and I left you to fight those villains alone," she admitted. "And when I saw that villain shoot you," she whimpered, barely able to keep what little composure she had left. She then felt something wrap itself around her and went stiff as a board as she realized Izuku was hugging her. She had never really experienced something like this. She could barely remember the last time she had ever been hugged by anyone who wasn't one of her siblings. So to have Izuku, who honestly she had just met, only have less than a day of conversation with, give her this comfort, it was shocking though not unwanted as she slowly reciprocated, bringing up her hands and pressing herself against him. "I'm sorry too, and I don't blame you," he said, turning his head to look at Mineta. "Either of you. I don't blame you for not coming. It's not like I had any real plan once I got there. Everything that happened was basically pure luck," he admitted honestly as he slowly released the hug, both children somewhat reluctant in doing so. "Besides, it all worked out in the end. We got to train our quirks and even got to test them out against real villains," he said, half smiling, Tsu could only stare at him in complete bewilderment. "You are insane," Tsuyu said, his smiling beginning to infect her as well. "You get used to it," Mineta said, smiling too. And as the trio relaxed and spirits lightened somewhat, none realized the shadowy figure watching them from afar, their cold blue eyes watching them like a predator. "Good Midoriya, barely a week in and you're already experimenting with your powers. But you're not even close to ready for what is to come. So you better keep going or else I'll have to give you some proper incentive." Izuku's room was filled with deep, rhythmic breathing as he performed his daily exercises. It hadn't even been a full day since he had taken a shotgun to the chest, but even still his push-ups were in the hundreds, and he barely felt tired, much less pain. With one last exertion marking his 400th, he pulled himself up. Rolling his shoulders, he stared at himself in the mirror with amazement. He never considered himself vain, but even he had to admit that he looked good as he flexed his new muscles. A physique that should have taken months to acquire was his in less than a week, and as the voice of the doctor telling him of his extreme metamorphosis, he could only agree. What the hell was that bomb, he whispered to himself as the strangeness continued to pile on itself, leaving him completely at a loss for answers. A condition he unfortunately had become more and more familiar with. Walking over to his desk, he flipped through the notebook designated for his quirk as he began writing down all the things his metamorphosis had entailed. Enhanced strength, enhanced endurance, healing factor, so many things that should have been quirks all their own were now all his. These things added with his general knowledge of quirks made it all seem so strange to him. Sure, a strength-enhancing quirk almost always had the added bonus of the body adapting to handle the stress that strength would put it under. Otherwise, they would break their arm whenever they tried to punch anything. But healing quirks were very rare, made even rarer still by either being able to heal others or themselves. To have his quirk also be able to heal him on top of everything else was unbelievable. "Izuku, honey, breakfast is ready," he heard his mother say from the other side of his door, pulling his mind away and leaving the questions for later. Slipping on his shirt and grabbing his phone, he left his room behind. Walking into the living room, he could see his mother at the stove, hands held up to its warmth like a fire as she watched over a boiling pot of corn, the smell mixing with the scent of tea and toast that altogether smelt nice. Sitting down at the table, a tense silence fell over the two of them as his mother kept her back to him. When he had gotten home yesterday from his encounter with the Reapers, his mother had given him a curious look and questioned why he was wearing something different than what he had left in. He had explained that he had gotten it from a store near the beach because he thought it looked nice, trying not to call attention to the lack of his previous clothes that he had thrown away with the rest of the beach junk. It hadn't been entirely a lie, but he had never been a good liar. While she had verbally accepted the story, telling him that she hoped he had a good time and that he looked nice in his new black and yellow jacket. But she was an even worse liar than he was, and he could see in her eyes that she didn't believe him. And now, as she turned around and sat down across from him, he could feel her eyes on him as they sat in silence, with the only noise being bubbling water and the crunch of food. "Izuku," she said, making him sink further into his seat as he looked into his reflection in his tea. He didn't want to look her in the eye because he knew he wouldn't be able to keep himself quiet. "Izuku, please," she said again. Pain in her voice as his chest tightened, the pressure growing more and more. He couldn't keep this up. He couldn't keep lying to his mom, and as he turned his head up to look at her, her own eyes filled with concern and filling him with shame. "Mom, he tried to say as a ping from his phone stopped him mid-sentence. His eyes darted to the screen and saw that it was Mineta. "Izuku, you need to see this," it said, and Izuku's eyes moved from his mom and the phone. "If it's important," she said with a soft smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hesitantly and with regret, he grabbed his phone, desperate to quickly find out what it was that Mineta had been talking about. Opening his texts, he saw that a video was attached. Pressing play, his eyes went wide as he choked on his tea and immediately excused himself, headed straight towards the bathroom. Locking the door behind him, he pressed his back to door as looked back to the title of the video. "Electric Kid Stops Gang." The video was from the perspective of someone's phone that was hiding in a building, their hands shaking from fear as the sound of gunfire and the cameraman's breathing. "Where are the heroes?" he heard the person said in a strangled whisper, as slowly the phone camera slid above the window sill to show the familiar red coats of the Reapers before a blast of blue lightning struck one of them. He watched the recording of his fight, the villains blowing up the roofs with grenades and jumping off the roof and landing in an explosion was him. Izuku's heart nearly seized in his chest, and he prayed that the cameraman's shaking hands and general chaos would make identify him hard. "Holy shit, that kid's kicking their asses," the person whispered in amazement, watching as he lunged for the villain's weapon as it exploded. The cameraman, however, was too focused on him to notice that Tsu had taken out the one with the whip quirk. He felt a sting of phantom pain as he watched himself take a shotgun to the chest and crawl his way to an electrical pole. And there at the end, the man zoomed in, his body wreathed in electricity and his face clear to see. "Shit, shit, shit," he whispered to himself as the heart began hammering in his chest, anxiety forcing the boy to pace back and forth across his bathroom with frantic footsteps. His eyes were flashing to and from the screen, unsure of where to even look as the magnitude of what was going to happen slammed onto him, only for his eyes to finally fall onto the view count. 1.4 million views. He nearly threw his phone as he dropped it onto the bathroom countertop with a loud thud. Sitting on the rim of his bathtub, he dragged his hands across his face, a muffled moan of agony escaping his lips. It hadn't even been a full 24 hours, and already so many had seen it. "I'm so fucked," he cringed, heel tapping a mile a minute against the floor as he heard his phone ping from another text. Scrunching his eyes, he pulled himself back up and lazily grabbed it, clammy fingers fiddling with the screen as he began reading. "Hey man, did you see what I sent you?" Mineta questioned. "Yeah, I saw it," he texted back as he sat back down, fingers combing through his hair. "Over 1 million, dude, it's crazy," Mineta exclaimed. "You're like one of the pros." "I didn't plan on being recorded," Izuku said back, his anxiousness turning hostile. "You didn't exactly do much to hide yourself," Tsu pointed out, finally joining the group text. Izuku groaned as breath through his teeth. He knew she was right, but it didn't help to hear it. But it wasn't like he had the time to find a mask or something while those bastards were shooting up the street. "So what are you gonna do?" Mineta asked. Izuku didn't know. He had no idea of how to even begin to handle this. He was hoping on this never happening to begin with. As he returned to pacing back and forth, beginning to hyperventilate as the thought of the police coming to his door and arresting him sent a dagger of fear right into his heart. And that dagger was driven even deeper when he heard a knock on the bathroom door. "Izuku, there's someone at the door for you," he heard her say, and he didn't have to see her face to know as the apprehension and worry flowed from her lips. He stared at the door like a child would stare at his closet, knowing full well that was behind it saw nothing he wanted. But unlike an over-imaginative child, he could not just curl up beneath his blanket. The consequences of his action had come for him, and they weren't leaving. But wait, someone, he internally questioned, his mind screeching to a halt at the use of that word. If it was just police at the door, their uniforms would have been clear to see, and if not, they should have at least identified themselves. "Who is it?" he asked, slowly moving towards the door as dread in place of fear slipped its way into him. "It's a woman who says she needs to talk to you," she answered back. A woman who wasn't dressed like a cop. Fear for himself was replaced with fear for his mother as he ripped the door open so hard, he nearly pulled it off its hinges as his mother leaped back from the sudden action. Inko looked like she about to speak, but Izuku ignored her entirely as electricity began to flow across his arms in preparation. Turning the corner, he saw a woman standing in his living room, their eyes cold and analytical as she scanned the room. She was wearing gray business suit and short brown hair. As she turned to face him fully, she seemed only mildly surprised by the electricity flowing from him as she gave a small, knowing smile. "The man of the hour," she said, her voice cold in spite of her words as she walked up and looked down at him. "Moya Jones," she raising her hand in invitation. Izuku quickly shook off the electricity in his hands as he accepted, shaking her hand as he wondered why this foreign woman wanted to speak with him. His mother came up behind him, watching the two of them as Moya turned to her. "You have a lovely home, Miss Midoriya. May I take a seat?" she said, turning her head to the couch. She didn't wait for a response from the matriarch of the house as she sat down, putting her briefcase to her side as she waited for the two Midoriyas to join her. The pair of them only had to look to each other for a moment before they both sat down opposite to her. "Who are you, and what do you want with my son?" she asked as she nervously tried to regain a foothold in the conversation. "You already know who I am," she said as she opened up her briefcase and pulled out a small tablet and placed it on the coffee table. "And what I want is to discuss this," she finished as she pressed a finger against the dark screen, its surface lighting up to show a video of him fighting the Reapers. Izuku was silent as the video played, his eyes barely focusing on it as he watched his mother's reaction, and it was not a good one. His mother gasped, her hand covering her mouth as her eyes went wide. She watched as her son fight real villains with real guns. And she watched him get shot. As the video ended, he watched just stare into the black screen, her wide eyes brimming with tears as she breathed deep and quick breaths. "Mom," he said, laying a hand on her shoulder which almost seemed to literally shock her back as she whipped her head to look him in the eye, but her mouth remained silent. "I'm sure this must be shocking, but I'll need to speak to your son in private," Moya said as his mother could only nod her head like a rusty gate. "Can I speak to you in your room?" she said, turning to Izuku, who was watching his mother, who looked like she had completely detached from the situation, staring off into space as tears ran down her face. Slowly, Izuku got up and led the woman to his room, looking back to his mother who just kept staring. As the two entered the room, and as Izuku shut the door, Moya pulled a small black disc from her pocket and dropped it on the floor. Immediately, the device beeped and emitted a matrix lattice that encompassed the entirety of the room as Izuku looked around in surprise. "Now we can talk freely," she said as she dropped her suitcase onto his desk and opened it once more. "What was that?" Izuku questioned defensively as the woman looked at him with an expression that for the first time seemed genuine. "It's a device that neutralizes sound in a given area. No sound can get in and no sound can get out," she explained as she sat down in his chair. "We have a lot to talk about before I do anything else. I need to know who you really are," he demanded, the entire situation leaving him with a horrible taste in his mouth. "I am a member of the Hero Public Safety Commission, International Division. Our job is to preserve peace, and as your encounter with that gang has proven, peace is currently getting bent over the table," she explained, leaning forward. "The Hero Public Safety Commission," he nearly yelled as the gravity of everything that was happening tripled in weight. The Hero Public Safety Commission was practically the be-all end-all of the hero industry. They were the ones who doled out licenses to new heroes and the ones that investigated the most dangerous crimes. "And you are Izuku Midoriya, aspiring hero, current vigilante, and the one who delivered the bomb," she said, looking into his eyes as if she could see right through him. Izuku immediately got to his knees, apologizing profusely as he tried to explain that he hadn't known that it was a bomb, tears beginning to form in his eyes as Moya silenced him. "I know, I've read the report," she said, rolling her eyes as he told him to stand back up. "I'm here because I need your help." That shocked him. What could he possibly have that she would want or need from him? She answered the silent question by pulling a small picture from her briefcase and showing to him the image of a dark-skinned man. "That's my husband, John White. Before the blast, he had been tasked with infiltrating the First Sons," she said, a look of deep sadness creeping into her eyes as she mentioned the man. "Who are the First Sons? Are they some sort of villain group?" he asked, to which Moya could only chuckle mirthlessly. "More like a secret society that has been around since before quirks even existed," she remarked. "And they were apparently working on a device called the Ray Sphere. A device designed to grant quirks by draining the neuroelectric energy from a group of people and concentrating it into an individual." This was all too much for Izuku. He knew that whatever that bomb had been a normal bomb. No normal bomb could grant quirkless people powers, but secret society and spies, this was beyond him. And why him of all people? Why had he been the one to deliver it? "Forgive me, but I still don't know what you want from me. The night of the blast I lost contact with him, and I have not been able to find him," she admitted, a single tear sliding down her face that she quickly wiped away. "But how do you expect me to find him?" he questioned. "I wouldn't even know where to begin." "I know, but you're the only one I know I can trust," she admitted, which stunned him. "What do you mean, you're a member of Hero Public Safety Commission?" he nearly screamed. "What do you mean I'm the only one you can trust? The reason I'm coming to you is because I believe members of the Hero Public Safety Commission might be compromised, and I can't be certain who or how many that have been," she revealed, flooring the young boy. "And I know I can trust you because I've read up on everything about you. You're a good kid, and what you did to stop those thugs only confirmed it beyond a shadow of a doubt," she praised. "And I know that if I were in your shoes, I'd want to find the person responsible for all of this." She stood back up, looking the young boy in the eye. "So I'm offering you a deal. Help me find John and the Ray Sphere, and we'll be able to find the one responsible for all of this and bring them down," she finished, offering her hand to him. Izuku stared at her outstretched hand, a flurry of thoughts whipping about in his mind. This was all so much. Only a week ago he was just a quirkless kid, but now he was being asked to work with a Hero Public Safety Commission agent to take down a secret society. Jesus Christ, it was all too much. But before anything else, he needed to know one thing. "My friends, Mineta and Asui, they helped me take down those villains. Can you make sure they don't get in trouble? It was all my idea," he asked, which made the woman smile. "They will be fine," she said, And as the memories of him waking in that crater, that voice from before he woke up and the thousands that died made his decision clear. "Where do we start?" he asked, grasping her hand and shaking it firmly, a look of determination growing behind his blue eyes. "I'll need some time with things as they are. For now, continue training for those entrance exams, though with less vigilantism," she advised with a smile. "How did you know I'm Hero Public Safety Commission right?" He was about to question before her position made it obvious how she knew. "Oh, and don't worry about contacting me," she said, breaking the handshake and retrieving the device from the floor, and with it, the matrix disappeared. "I'll contact you," putting everything back into her suitcase. The two then left the room, and to his relief, his mother was no longer staring into space. But instead of that, she was watching the video of his fight with the villains, and from the line of tears on her face, he could tell that she hadn't stopped watching it. "Thank you for letting me into your home, and you'll be happy to know that no charges will be filed against your son for his vigilantism," she said as her hand asked for the tablet back to she did. "Yes, thank you," she said, picking herself up and drying her eyes with her sleeve that had grown damp from repeated use. The two walked with Moya to the front door and, giving her thanks one last time, shut the door and leaving them in silence once more. "Mom, he tried to say before his mother cut him off with a statement that shook him. "You aren't going to UA, I'm pulling you out," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument, but Izuku made room. "Mom, I know you're upset," but he tried to say again before his mother did something she had never done. With hand outstretched and in a wide arc, she delivered a hard slap across his face. With his enhanced physiology, the strike barely budged him, but it still left him stunned. Inko too looked stunned by what she had done, looking between him and her hand as she began to yell, "No, no, no," again and again. "No. I'm not going to lose you again," she cried as she stared at him in desperation and grief. "Lose me? Mom, I know I nearly died because of the blast," but he tried speak again, but once more was cut off by his mother as she screamed. "You did die?" The words left him speechless as his mother ranted and raved, tears falling from her reddened face. "Your heart stopped, Izuku, no pulse for 6 minutes. They tried and tried to resuscitate you, but you wouldn't wake up. I begged them to keep trying for just one more minute, but I could see them bringing a body bag. They were going to put my little boy in a bag forever." She screamed as she croaked out the words, each one a labor as if a vice had been wrapped around her throat. Her legs began to give out under her as Izuku quickly grabbed his mother, holding her weight as she cried and cried. "But you came back," she sobbed. "My reason for living came back to me," she said as she looked into her son's eyes. "So no, you're not going anywhere," she urged, balling her fist and weakly hitting her fist on the floor. "You're staying here where I know you're safe." It killed him inside to see his mother like this, his body feeling cold as he hugged her to him as she sobbed into his shoulder. But it hurt even more to know that he would have to go against her and make her cry even more. "Then you should have made her arrest me," he said as his mother looked at him in anger, but he refused to, silenced again as he continued. 6,000 people died, Mom. 6,000 people, and they're still pulling more bodies out every day. People that will never get to see their mothers again, or their sons. People who had their lives stolen, and the thousands more who will never see them again," he asserted, his fervor growing deeper with every word. "Those clothes I got yesterday, they were a gift from a man named Haruki Sato. He lost his son in the blast. He will never see his son again, and he asked me to become a hero. What right do I have to just hide away after so many have died? So if you want me to stop, then call the cops and have them arrest me, because it's never gonna happen otherwise. Because even if I don't go to UA, I will still save people. You have no power over that. The only power you have is whether or not your son saves people as a hero or a vigilante. Those are your only two options," he finished, breathing heavily as his mother stared at him, her eyes breaking as she began to hiccup in sorrow, burying her face back into his shoulder. "You selfish, selfish boy," she croaked as the pair hugged each other tight in the hallway. "I know." And as the two sat there, a call was being made as the woman called Moya raised her phone to her head. "The bird has been fed. Let's see if he can fly. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.